Here's a spicy one. Pokemon Good. I've ranted about it before, but with Sword and Shield, I feel the games have finally become something resembling accessible, without sacrificing any of the depth. EVs are cheap and clearable, natures and abilities are alterable with consumables, and you can max out the IVs of level-capped mons super easy with the combination of generously provided bottle caps and XP candy. With all this, you'd expect all but a return to Pokemania, but people seem to be pretty over the series ATM. Now, this is nothing too new, fans are fickle and always get uppity when a new gen drops. Presently, the collective consciousness is rosily nostalgic for Unova, but when Black and White first came out, people felt just as alienated when they couldn't get their hands on classic fan-favorite Pokemons. I don't want to paint the folks as universally unreasonable here, though. A lot of people play Pokemon for different reasons, and I've already discussed in another vid how the campaigns could be improved for JRPG fans. But for this video, I want to update my opinions for Gen 8. We'll be discussing why the roster cuts are good actually, some theories on what could make for a more painless jump into new regions in the future, and what I'd like to see going forwards. Consider this my critique of Pokemon Sword and defense of Pokemon Shield. The loudest feedback comes from the Dex Cut controversy, though I doubt that's actually the game's most pressing problem. If the meta is going to change with the addition of new monsters to play around with, then it's for the best that people are pushed to use their new toys, rather than just relying on what's already good. The alternative is making the new stuff crazy strong, which would make the additions feel more like replacements when they make the oldies obsolete. What's more is that if every Pokemon is available from the jump, then the next game in the same generation has nowhere to go gameplay-wise. The sequel isn't going to feel very interesting if it has exactly the same selection of critters. On top of that, not all the game is good, and it's okay for some of it to get axed or at least remixed. Landorus, Xerneas, Primal Groudon, looking at you. Most critically, there's newbies and children to worry about. They gotta know the broad strokes of what they're likely to go up against. Galar's default dex had 400 different guys to learn, 88 of which are brand new. Plus 420 for the DLCs, not counting the unlisted legends and starters. That's a lot of info to cram compared to Gen 7's 300 with 81 new, and Gen 6's 450 with 72 new. To be grossly reductive, there are 3 flavors of teams you can run in a game with a roster this big. There's on meta, where you use the most powerful tools at your disposal. There's counter meta, where you specifically build your team to take out what you assume you're going to run into, but then there's off meta, where you just go nuts and make the obscure tech work in an attempt to blindside your opponent. This means that the game gets more rewarding and fun the more complex and confusing it is, but it also means that players can have hours of team building trashed by tactics they were just not aware of. To make the single player aspect of labbing and prepping satisfying, a player needs to actually have an understanding of the game, and when there are so many different dudes, it's best to introduce them over a period of time, so as to not confuse and frustrate newbies. I've made this point before, but Pokemon has to balance its exponentially expansive depth with its extremely accessible appeal. On one end, the game needs to be approachable for new players, and on the other, it needs to make each little dude uniquely applicable to the meta. What I'd like to add on top of that here is that this goes double for new entries in the series, where everyone is going to have to get acclimated to the new tech. If it's inevitable that the classic mons are going to have to wait before arriving in a new region, since the stuff needs to be introduced slowly, then how can we make that as painless as possible for players who want to actually catch them all? How should a new generation play out in a way to satisfy the entire fanbase? Let's start with things that haven't blown over well first. Unova released with 156 brand new critters, but since it didn't have the classics until the post-game, it suffered from the same backlash from alienated fans. This problem was best addressed in Kalos, where old mons were plentiful, but each route had rare new dudes that you had to hunt down. Personally, I play each new game with an all-new team, but many people get attached, so I think this way everybody wins. Classics are easy to find, and newbies are extra special, since you have to actively hunt them down. Consequently, as far as I can tell, Kalos had very little controversy with its deck selection, even though it only capped at 454. That's only slightly larger than Galar. I guess the main source of conflict with Dexit is that you're unable to transfer everything from the old games, but also I kind of wish Sword and Shield actually had more restrictive transfer rules. Moves like Knockoff and Tailwind are no longer learnable in the new region, since tutors are restricted to second entries, but are still accessible via transfer, so the optimal way to make certain Pokemon is to create them in the prior gen and transfer them forwards. In a way, it's nostalgic and cool to go backwards and dig up old games, but it sucks that you have to own more video games when you just want to play the one. Even more, at this point in my life, I just want to retire my 3DS and deal with the transfer process as little as possible. The novelty of linking up different games wore thin after the 3D transition. So, where do we go from here? Presently, the games are plenty deep and plenty accessible, but they could still be innovated on. We need some sort of reversed bottle cap to bring IVs down to 0 if the player wants to build a Trick Room team, or counteract foul play. And we need the EV feathers to be more easily farmable if the player wants their spread to be more specific than just multiples of 10. The campaign needs something, anything, to make it worthwhile. I still maintain that the AI should focus more on doubles, where it can stand a chance without destroying the babies who play these baby games. I'm not saying we need an entire Breath of the Wild open world with a jump button and live online multiplayer, but I mean, it couldn't hurt. I really enjoyed Sword and Shield since it changed things up from prior games, and I don't mind waiting for old stuff to come back incrementally, but I understand why people felt it was lacking in the single player department. I imagine they attribute this to the dex cuts, but really I think it has more to do with the boring campaign. The postgame is so great that I ended up filling multiple boxes with competitive ready mons, but if you're not playing for that, then you're not going to stick around long enough to enjoy the Crown Tundra's experimental open world side questing. I guess they should try and lead with that next time, instead of hiding it behind a paywall. Dynamax gives some wow factor to each fight without limiting your choices like Megas did, but overall I feel it simplifies the games to its detriment to get rid of your more intricate moves for big damage. And finally, I think so long as the games keep the battling system intact, the overworld could be very different without pissing people off. Do we really want Diamond and Pearl remakes that just take place on a grid again? Let's Go was very bad. I didn't make a video about it at the time because I didn't want to rain on the parade, but the same game again, with no abilities and an unevolvable starter is just boring. Here's the breakdown. Focus on making the grind short and satisfying, sex up the campaign, and hide the new behind the old to please everybody. Restrictions make the game work better, but new gens shouldn't alienate old fans. And there's still room to grow. Most importantly, if Game Freak's going to cut critters next time around, they should be upfront about what they plan to throw into the DLC. Maybe in the future we can focus on extensions rather than remakes. It's better for the community to see what a new addition can do to an existing game, rather than having to juggle multiple game cartridges. Don't get it twisted. Pokemon good, actually. But hopefully with a few tweaks, I'll be back for Gen 9 simply saying, Pokemon good.